Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, where our job is to help you build visibility, professional credibility, and connection with your ideal client by putting the human at the center of innovative marketing, so you can build and strengthen an engaging, enduring relationship with your ideal clients. I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm honored that you're here with me. If you haven't joined our wonderful marketing transformation community yet, go to innovabiz.co and collect your free gift as well. Do subscribe to the show and also leave a review because it helps others find us. Let's get into today's masterclass on this InnovaBuzz podcast.
You can impact the world. You're doing it every day. And you can forecast. You do it every day, but you could be stronger at it. And you can have an influence in places you'd never thought about if you consider the network effect. The people that you influence others, which influence others. So you have a voice, and you have a choice to make that voice heard or to hide.
Welcome back. I hope your week's been awesome so far. If you haven't had a chance to listen to my recent conversations with content strategist and writer Lacey Boggs, or with improv coach Jay Suko, then do check them out. But only after you've listened to today's conversation, of course. I'm really excited to have on the InnovaBuzz podcast as my guest today, David Goldsmith, President and co-founder of the Goldsmith Organization, a consulting firm solving big challenges while servicing executive clients globally. David is a serial entrepreneur and investor. He's the recipient of the Hollywood producer's first Global Visionary Disruptor Award for his work with the Project Moon Hut Foundation, and together, David and Lorrie Goldsmith earned a Literary Achievement Award for their book, Paid to Think, a leader's toolkit for redefining your future. David also earned New York University's Excellent in Teaching Award during his 12 years as professor. He's received accolades and recognition for his business achievements and was named by Meetings magazine as one of its 26 hottest speakers. In our discussion today, David talked to me about taking a truly global perspective in all that we do. We talked about how to anticipate the future better, and David gave some advice there that we can all apply. And David shared how we can all impact the world with our unique voice. Without further ado, then let's fly into the hive and get the buzz from David Goldsmith. Hi, I'm your host Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBuzz, and I'm really excited to welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast today from New York in the USA, David Goldsmith. He's president and co-founder of the Goldsmith Organization. He's a serial entrepreneur, he's a speaker, and he's author of the book Paid to Think. Welcome to the InnovaBuzz podcast, David. It's a real privilege to have you as my guest.
I'm honored to be invited.
Roger Salem, who was our guest on episode 313 of the InnovaBuzz podcast, suggested that we have you on the show for a conversation. So big hello to Roger.
Yes, big hello. And everybody makes mistakes, so we invited me.
Now, I was fascinated. Your background in university was in science, but you didn't actually go into any career in science. You started up a business in university, and you've been on the internet ever since then. So you were telling me just before recording that the early days of podcasting. So how did you kind of discover that the internet was the place you were going to do your business and make your living?
Well, actually, I haven't made my living off the internet, to be a little bit more precise, but I could share with you how I got onto this whole construct of using the net. I'm not a year person, so it was early in the 2000s when I had been, a group of 6 people were on the phone talking about the potential to set up the first chapter for New York State for the National Speakers Association. There was a chapter in New York City, but that's very far away from someone like me. And it was a tri-state chapter. So we were setting up this chapter, and I had actually put them on mute. And I was not paying attention. And before I knew it, I heard this phrase, "Congratulations, David, you are our first president." And I didn't know how to react, so I reacted thankfully, like, this is great. And at that time, there were challenges, and there are more challenges in the consulting speaking industry, and they continue to evolve. And I knew if we were just a typical chapter, we would not get the visibility we needed to be able to grow. So over the next 2 months, we created multiple products. One of them that I decided would be valuable would be a telecast series. They weren't called podcasts, they were telecasts. And it was a means by which to reach a distributed group of individuals. New York State is a large state, not relative to Australia as a country, but the state goes about 15 hours driving or 17 hours driving from tip to tip. So we didn't have a lot of density. And I said, what if we could create a virtual type chapter, virtual and in person? And one of the products was this telecast. So I decided we would interview people who were difficult to get a hold of and then record them. And our first series, I remember one guy said, "I'll hold the phone to the recorder." So we didn't have this technology. We actually had a recorder held to a telephone. And it was a mobile phone, but still mobile, recorded. And then we grew. And at one point, as the series evolved, someone in California said to me, "Well, how could we get copies of your interviews? Because you're getting people we would never be, are very difficult to get on." Tom Peters took me 2 years. Jay Abraham became a good friend of mine, but that took over 2 years. And what we decided to do was white label it, where our podcasts or telecasts would go out. And before you knew it, we had over 1,000 members, including Australia, and you're from Australia. So we had the Australian chapter was a member of our New York State Chamber, National Speakers Association. And so too were many others. So we had 17 presidents of other chapters around the world. We had people from China. We had people from Israel, people from South Africa, and they had joined up because of this podcast that we had developed. So it was, I believe, a successful product. And we did about 150 podcasts from, the names were icons in the industry at that time.
Interesting. And did you have any idea when you first went down that track where this whole thing would lead in terms of the podcasting and the online video conversations that we're having today, and indeed the internet itself?
I wouldn't say that I completely forecasted the evolution of the internet. That would be a very far stretch. I can say that I was amazed at how powerful the reach became. Yet, to some degree, my approach to the podcast was very different than I believe many individuals who are podcasting. I would say often, and I still say it today, we have 2 podcast series right now running, is I speak to an audience of 1. And that always confuses individuals. Why would you speak to an audience of 1? Is that two pieces to this. 1, in a given year, I'm going to ask you, how many hours of education do you normally get in a year? Physical education, how many hours?
Physical in person or?
No, just a really getting an education. How many hours do you normally get?
In a year?
Yeah.
I'd say it's probably thousands.
That's because of now with the technology that exists. But before that, people would say, "Oh, no, I tried to go to a class. I tried to do something." Well, I've done 2,800 interviews. Not all of them are recorded, but about 190 are. So the interview is my lesson. So I would have between 100 to 250 hours from some of the most famous individuals or some brilliant individuals in the world teaching me. So that was my education source. My second part of it was that I wanted to create a relationship with the person I was speaking with. It wasn't about the marketing. It was, I wanted to learn from you. But if I can learn from you at the same time, I end up with this relationship that can never be unbroken. And to give you an example, I did an interview with Brian Tracy. And when I was done, Brian said, this was probably one of the best interviews I've ever had. And I don't know if you know the name Brian Tracy.
Oh, yeah. Eat that frog. Yeah.
Yeah. And he said, whatever you want, you can have. And I said to him, I should have asked for being on stage. No, I didn't. I wasn't that smart. I said to him, I want to interview Jay Abraham. And he said, no, I said, yeah, I would like to interview Jay Abraham. He said, done. I said, what do you mean done? He said, done. So the next day I'm at home and I get a phone call and it says, this is Jay Abraham. Now I've been trying to get Jay for 2 years. And Jay said, I got this call from Brian. He said, anything you want from me, no matter what it is, I have to do. And I said, well, I want to interview you. Again, not a smart reply. I could have said, I want you to coach me for the next 5 years. I wanted you to do, I wasn't. And I said, I want to interview you. And we became great friends. So he became he wrote the foreword to my book. It's a 750-page tome. He printed out 6 times. And so my relationships with each of the interviewees became the relationship that built upon. And those were the 2 primary. And then everything else was a value added. It was, and I still do that to this day. I still look for the person that I want to connect to. I create the interview around meeting that amazing person. I learn from them, and then the audience of one is solved. Anything after that is a bonus. It's icing on the cake.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that approach. My philosophy around this podcast is very similar in terms of, for me, it's an hour's masterclass each time I do an hour conversation with someone. And the bonus is that I get to share it with my audience, so they get to listen in.
Well, it's so to answer your question, did I know what the future would be? No. Did I understand that I needed to learn? Yes. And I still, to this day, I have some amazing guests and I learn a tremendous amount from them.
I was listening to a podcast, I think it was, that you did recently, and it was talking about the response to COVID and what's happening in the future, how you saw us coming out of this COVID. And one of the things, because you touched on it just briefly then, the international aspect. And one of the things that fascinated me was you were talking there about people need to understand what's going on in different parts of the world. And unless you've lived there and unless you've taken the time to really kind of feel that, it really restricts your thinking. So talk to us a little bit about that, because that's something when you started talking about that and when I was listening in on that, I thought that is something that I've always felt, because as somebody who's kind of grown up in different cultures and traveled around internationally a huge amount in my corporate career, I always felt that people didn't see what was going on around different parts of the world and didn't have, they had a very blinkered vision.
Okay, that's a very good question. And I'll try to bring it from 3 different components that I think are valuable. The first one is, and it's a kind of a jump to make this happen. When I wrote the book, and I wrote a book, a lot of people have written books, so I'm not saying it to say anything amazing. When I wrote Book Paid to Think, the most difficult chapter in the book to write, and you could have seen how thick it is.
Yeah.
It's a tome. It took 12 years to write. Was the chapter on global awareness. I asked individuals, executives, how do you get people to be globally aware? And I had the worst answers in the world. Have people travel. I know people who travel are not globally aware. They see the Leaning Tower of Pisa. They go to the next one. They go to the next one. They said, have people live in a country. I just came back this past year from Hong Kong. Everything happening in Hong Kong. I've lived there for 10 years. I've lived in Europe. And I know people who've lived in the culture didn't do local activities, couldn't say a word of Cantonese. So just because you lived someplace doesn't mean you understood it. And one of the values, I think, of being a leader or a person in authority or person making decisions is the ability to be able to understand culture or other people's culture, and that's not just globally encompassing, meaning your neighbor is a different global citizen. They might have a different culture, they might have a different background, they might have a different orientation to the world, a different understanding of politics. So what you were referring to when it comes to COVID is this. When we're talking about how, and I believe this is the phrase, I've done a series of interviews, is that when COVID is governance, a lot of the solving of the challenges we have come down to governance, how you govern. And it was in the early part of COVID, I think it was in March, where I did a podcast, not a podcast, I did a video. And I said on the video, what are you not seeing? And I was asking individuals all over the world, what don't you see? And I didn't get any good answers. And I said, what you're not seeing is Philippines, Indonesia, in Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, the continent of Africa, Brazil, and Mexico. These are places that have slums that are up to 2 million people. They can't get 2 meters from one another. They are not capable of getting fresh water. They're not capable, just to list access to medicine. And I said, unless that gets solved, no matter how much is done in all the other 195 minus countries in the world, we will never go back to normal. And we won't go back to normal because of bias and xenophobia and all the challenges that come along with it. So there was an event in Barcelona. It was the Mobile World Conference that was canceled in February. And it was canceled because people were afraid of the disease coming from Wuhan. Now, I'm going to be very specific. I say this often. It didn't come from China. China's the same size as Europe, the same size as the United States. All of China never got the coronavirus. Wuhan is a city like New York is a city, like Sydney is a city, like all the other countries have cities in them. And let's say it was canceled because of fear of people coming from Wuhan. So let's have an event next year in Berlin. And someone shows up and they're wearing a turban. We can't have them. It's all in India. Yes, but I'm English. I'm Portuguese. I live in Brazil. I'm from Brazilian. And the challenge is, if you don't understand cultures, if an individual doesn't have a grasp, it makes it very difficult to make value-based decisions on a total scale. So the one trick I teach people, and maybe this is useful to you, is I always say, always, always, always start with 7.5. 7.5 billion people. So when you say, well, everybody thinks that way, all 7.5 billion, everybody understands that. All 7.5 billion? Now here's where it becomes tricky. You've traveled the world. I've worked in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, South Africa, Colombia. I've worked in Russia. I've worked in Denmark. And I go around the world. And working is different than speaking or visiting. Because when you work, you get to know their cultures, their customs, their activities. And you would understand that solving the pandemic or solving the challenges of COVID is very different for everybody in the world. And we, I think as humans, try to be very concentric around our own lifestyle, and our own approach. And I think that jeopardizes the solution to, in this case, a pandemic or world crises that exist.
Yeah,
I don't know if I answered that well.
Yeah, no, I think the example of COVID and the challenges that are presented by people in different environments or to those people, and as a consequence, because we're all connected, right? So if the slums in the Philippines or in India, they can't do social distancing, they can't do hygiene the way we're being told in the West this is going to help. They probably don't have access to masks. They certainly don't have access to good health care. And so what's the pandemic going to be doing there? It's just going to have free reign. And does that mean that in the other parts of the world we can keep it under control?
I hear a lot, and I don't know if you do, you could tell me if you do. I hear a lot about the world is awakening. I hear a lot about the Great Reset. I don't know. Are you seeing it? Are you seeing this amazing awakening, people treating their neighbors better than they were ever before? They love people more than ever. Do you see the world becoming more homogenous and caring? Do you see this getting together to solve COVID as one community? I don't.
Yeah,
I don't know. Do you?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, examples where people are treating their neighbours, caring for their neighbours or so on, are highlighted as, see, this is evidence. And unfortunately, they're actually in isolation, and I often think, why is that being highlighted? Because that's the right thing to do. And yet, I'm seeing, for example, just here in our local area, Melbourne has had what they're calling a second wave. I'm sort of a bit scared that it's actually still the first wave. But they've had a big spike after seemingly having it under control, and now the government has very strict lockdown measures in place, and the amount of political backstabbing that's going on for people that are basically just observers and criticizing the government who are taking action, whether it's the right action or not, but they are taking action and they are having an impact on the numbers of infected people, and they are having an impact on reducing the number of deaths, and we've had quite a number of deaths. But then there are people saying, but the economy's suffering, so we have to open up the economy. And I often think, a friend of mine said, I feel like telling people, open up your Facebook feed and now point out, and it's got to be close family or close friends, point out half a dozen people that you're happy to see die as a result of the COVID, and then tell me that we have to open up the economy.
A question for you, because you just brought it just came to mind. You said you might be entering the second wave, and my reply was no, it's still the first. So my question to you is, when you say you're in the second wave, are you seeing your second wave as 7.5, or are you seeing your second wave of just your geography?
This is just our geography, and this is what we're being told. So that's why I'm saying I think we're still in the first wave.
And that's where it becomes that whole construct of 7.5. If we look at this as a global pandemic, then we can't have someone that said Israel's on their fourth wave, or Hong Kong is on their fourth wave. How are they on their fourth wave? It's a global pandemic. We have to evaluate it. Is it still going up in the world? And I remember, probably you do, looking at Worldometer or one of these others you saw, you remember it was 30,000 people a day, and now it's 300,000 people a day getting it. To me, on a global scale, this is the first pandemic. Now, here's the good part. And I don't know if this said in the interview, so I think it would be good for the readers, the listeners, to hear this, because it helps me every day. I decided back in March to start doing some research. And we've all heard about the Spanish flu. We've heard it was 1918 to 1920. We've also heard that there have been other pandemics. So let's do a little quick tour. The Black Plague. Do you know how many people died during the Black Plague?
No, I don't.
200 million. You know how many people were on the planet?
A lot less than now.
400 million. So 1 out of every 2 people theoretically died. So, and the numbers were probably not kept very well, but it meant that almost 1 out of every 2 people you met died. Okay, so then let's travel to the pandemic of the Spanish flu. And if you do the math, there were approximately 1/3 of the world's population got infected. That's 500 million people. I think today we're about 30 some odd million, but 500 million people were infected. But that's 1/3 of the world population. If we take 7.5 billion, that means 2.5 billion people must be infected to equal the Spanish flu. 50 to 100 million people died. So how many people would have to die today to equal the Spanish flu? It's math. It comes out to between 250 million to 500 million people must die to be the equivalent disaster of the Spanish flu. Now they did, I hate the word for social distancing. You and I are becoming friends over this. So we are socially connected. I always say physically distancing. So physical distance and masks were the recipe for that. It took 2 years for it to dissipate, solve, and it took 3 years to get back to normal. We hugged, we kissed, people went to bars, picked up a mate, they traveled, they went in airplanes, all of this happened, and in my impression, maybe somebody told me differently, there is no evidence of a behavioral trait from the Spanish flu. But you can, if we fast forward to SARS, which was the early 2000s, 800 people died, and it impacted, I think it was 29 Asian countries, or the Asia Pacific region. There is one behavioral trait, one, from that from the SARS pandemic, and that is in Asia, you put on a mask to protect others. So while I lived in Hong Kong, one day I'm working into a meeting and CEO says to me, "You need a mask." And I must have sniffled, made a sound, and I said, "Yes." And I wore a mask. It was hot. It was uncomfortable. But in Hong Kong, you put on a mask when you felt ill to protect others. So if you went to an airport and you saw someone wearing a mask, they were doing it as a courtesy to you, not being afraid of you as a person. And that's the only behavioral trait. Now, it kind of makes me sad that expats in Hong Kong did not wear masks. They didn't wear masks because, well, hey, it's their country, I guess. I don't know. So today, we have all these luxuries. I mean, we're on video chat, we have telephones, we have computers in our hands that can do everything in the world. We're calling it a second, a third, or a fourth wave because we're inconvenienced. We want this to be over fast. The measles took 4 years. The Ebola took 5 years to find vaccines or cures or mitigation tools. So early part of this year, I said to people, this will go a minimum of middle of next year. No, just because of testing, just because of time it took. So mentally, I don't go through a roller coaster expecting that tomorrow will be a better day. It will be a different day. And we're not being reset because I don't love my sister more. I don't love my friends more. They don't love me more. People are angry at one another. And we're not working together as a global community to solve this. So it shows that we haven't grown. So I don't say it's a reset. I think it's an aspirational thought. But it does disservice to people who think, well, next month I'll be out and I'll be able to play and do. No, you won't. You just won't. So understand that this is how you protect yourself. And the disease or COVID has shown to show signs of memory loss, brain disease, heart disease. There are a lot of challenges with this. And the way I look at it, and this is my perception, is if I'm to live another 40 years, do I want to carry along with me a potential disease that could be, to me, maybe not to others, it could be damaging for me to do sports. It could be more challenging for me to remember something at later age in life. So I've come to grips with this, and I accept my everyday as this is how I meet people. And I appreciate us meeting each other. And this is better than it was in 1918. So I'm happy that I have this time in life to be able to experience this. I don't know if it's a long-winded example, but I hope it's useful.
It is. I think it puts things into perspective. And I think, one of the things I say quite often is, there's two global pandemics being highlighted right now. One of them's been going on for probably as far back as humans have been on the planet. The other one came about recently, or at least we only became aware of it recently. And the first one is human stupidity. And and combined with selfishness. And I don't think there ever will be a vaccine for that one.
You've said it out loud. Just so you know, we're not going to edit this. Yes, it is. I heard recently, I didn't read it, I heard recently that let me take a step even further back. While in Hong Kong, I was working with this one woman, this one person, she happened to be a woman, and she said to me, I don't know why we focus so much on eyes, where people have just as much difference with smell, with taste, with ears, with their sound, and other sensory perception, that we focus just on one area. And when it comes to forecasting, to be able to look into the future, some people are really good at it, and some people cannot do that. So my question becomes, when you look at humankind as a whole, did our biological upbringing, did our makeup, did the ability for some people to be able to think and some people be able to do with their hands or create, some people be able to be very mathematical, while other people are very musically inclined? Was there a value 50,000 years ago for that diversity that to some degree allowed them to thrive, where today we're stepping all over each other and it doesn't serve its purpose the same way? And I don't know that answer, yet I sometimes ask myself, which I'm assuming you would probably too, why does that person do well? They can't tie their own sneakers. They don't know how to drive a car. They can't do about 80 things that I know you could do, Jargon. You can do them. And you say, and this person made $50 million. They can't do anything but this one thing extremely well. Is there some human existence capability that fulfilled itself then that doesn't fill it now? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and I think the idea that we focus so much on the eyes and all the different senses, and I know certainly with listening, people listen quite differently, and some people overhear things. They just overhear them, and we think, well, maybe they're ignoring us or ignoring what's being said or ignoring the sounds, and yet maybe it's actually they can't hear them. And we know that people that are vision impaired, for example, compensate by having heightened awareness in the other senses to match up for the fact that their vision isn't as good as a sighted person. So perhaps that's what's happening. So there's a focus on one or other senses.
And there could be a cultural component of that too. I remember when I first arrived in Hong Kong, the old adage or saying is that Westerners will say all the Asians look the same. But West Asians would often think, and they'd look at me and say, I can't tell the difference between you and me. Like, you can't see white hair, red hair. No, they don't. And so I asked my first friend I ever had in Hong Kong, I was sitting down with her and I said, how do you fill out a police report? So what do you mean? I said, if you had this describe somebody for a police report, how would you describe it? Guess what was her first thing that she said?
I don't know.
Number of eyelids. No eyelids, one eyelid, or two eyelids.
Wow.
And I'm thinking to myself, you see eyelids? And I didn't see eyelids. And then she said round face, oval face, jawline, because as a Westerner, it's red hair, you have hair, you have different colors. It wasn't that answer. And that's because culturally, to be able to understand the Chinese language or to understand Asian languages in particular that I'm thinking about, not that they're very difficult languages in Eastern Europe, is the length of a name for a Thai person is so long. Just to say some names are very difficult for somebody who's not from the culture. But the Asian ear, Chinese ear, not Asian, I'd say Chinese ear, is much more fine-tuned to hear all the differences in sound. Ma, 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 ma. I mean, they mean something different. One is a cloth, another one is a horse, another one is a... So to be able to differentiate. So I think that that differentiation might have served a purpose that today runs amok, becomes a challenge. I don't know. I probably should ask an anthropologist what their thoughts are on it.
Yeah. Yes, but I remember I used to have interesting conversations because in Asia, the Asians would often make fun of us and say, "You guys all look the same."
And we do. And the thing is, in my place is, I have to honor and respect that. I just did a podcast with Namrata Gatswani. She is an Indian person. She's from India, lives in the United States now, and it was on China's space ambitions. And she will tell you that I often would say, wait, you have to look at it, that their ambitions might be antagonistic to parts of the world, but to them, that is how they're thriving. That's their way of living that that this might be encroaching on. There's 1.4 billion people. That is the United States at 330 million people. That is Europe with 400 and some odd million people. Then you add on top of it, you could put Japan in there, and you could put Russia in there, and you still wouldn't equal the total of this one country that is trying to survive, thrive, give its people its resources. I'm not saying what they're doing is right or wrong. It's a perception. And the more we can understand and come from 7.5, the more or better I think we can make decisions about how to help and change this world, this planet that we live on.
Yes, global awareness and thinking in the perspectives of other people. And I'm always fascinating. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on in politics right now to antagonize the Chinese. And if it's intended that way, then those politicians are doing a fabulous job. But I suspect that they don't intend it that way. And then I always think to myself, why did they say that? And why did they expect any different response from China? I mean, it's kind of like a slap in the face, virtually.
My South African partner at a company in South Africa said to me once, when China strikes, you never hear a sound. If you look at China's history, they are typically not the aggressors declaring war. They will fight, but they have not declared war. Again, I'm not saying I believe in China's politics. I'm not saying I believe that that's the best way to have a culture. I'm just taking it from the perspective of someone who's lived in Hong Kong, been in the Asia Pacific region for 10 years, and has relished in all the diversity of this entire planet that can come from Colombia to Israel. So the approach. One of China's values is saving face. I don't know of many countries off the top of my head, let's say Western, where if I went Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Hungary, Bulgaria, if I went Germany, Poland, France, UK, Canada, if I went down through the United States, Mexico, and all the way down to Argentina, I can't think of many countries in the world that has that cultural understanding or belief structure. So if an individual negotiating, working with, participating, doesn't know where that place comes from, it's very difficult to understand their reaction and how they will play the game.
Yeah.
And that's about 3 weeks ago, I was at one of our rental properties and we had branches hanging over the top. My wife doesn't like that I do this, but I have 2 chainsaws and I've got full climbing gear and I'm a big tool guy. And so when she took off, I climbed up about 10 meters up and I was cutting down branches. And one of the challenges that I learned a long time ago is, even though a branch might only be 4 meters long, it's not that it will fall like a brick. It doesn't fall straight down. As you cut it, it starts to fall. And the branch, if it's alive, has that bendiness, that twigness in it. And the branch could hit the ground and then bounce back up, or it can hit your ladder out from underneath you. You cannot, unless you really, really study and understand how different branches and twigs work, know how to be safe. So there was one branch we were cutting. It was probably, 70 centimeters, 80 centimeters in diameter. And I said to my son, I called my son out for this because I had a feeling the ladder could be thrown from underneath me. So I harnessed myself to the tree. I did all sorts of things. And I said to my son, it can bounce in a certain way. And I said, get clear, get clear. But he didn't get clear because he figured it would just fall and it wouldn't hit him. Where did it hit? It hit right on the ladder. So when you look at countries or individuals all over the world, it's good to know and honor and respect that individuals have different reactions. And that comes down to gender, race, religion, creed. There's so many variables. Their upbringing, were they abused? Were they not? Did they have food to eat when they were growing up? Did they learn to shoot a rifle? Did they not? Did they go in the military? Each one of those types of, and I could probably give 50 of them, those are just came to mind. We have to be cognizant of the fact that we are humans with a lot of diversity within us, and we have different reactions to everything. So yeah, poking China, it's poke North Korea. Poke anybody.
Yes, so it's just the idea that, I guess, my philosophy is, and I talked about the stupidity of people, but my philosophy is that everybody's actually doing the best they can with what they've got, and probably with the best of intentions. Now that's a generalization too, and there's probably exceptions to that. I'm sure there are people that have evil intent. But I would think they're in the minority.
Evil is relative. Evil is relative. I want to feed my family, therefore I start a factory and it puts poison into the water, but I can feed my family. I'm not going to take care of the water because it doesn't impact me. Would you say that's evil?
Yeah.
Don't know. I believe there are I've seen people with evil intent, and their desire is to do harm. And I see people today in media, in writing, whose intent is anti somebody. And there was a data point that I don't know if it was my son or one of my sons or I read. Do you know how many meals you are from doing something you would have not considered ever doing if you weren't fed? Do you know how many meals that is?
Maybe only 3 or 4, is it?
I think it's 5. And I think the extreme number is 9. The things you would do if you knew you couldn't eat for 5 meals and there was no hope. If you had a family and they had not eaten for 5 meals, what would you do to justify your existence that you might have thought today was incomprehensible? And I guess I'm saying that the judgment that we have is very situational and very difficult to truly comprehend where everybody's coming from. And today's pandemic has, again, nothing like the pandemics I described earlier, yet there are huge consequences to the actions that we're taking today. And my hope, and that's what I think if you did some of the research you saw, I've got a foundation we're working on. We want to improve how we live on Earth for all species. Every day I wake up and work on that. So I'm hoping that we can take this planet and and change it in a way that maybe the next 500 years will be improved for individuals.
Well, we've talked a lot about COVID. I mean, there's lots of other issues that the planet's facing. And what I'm interested in exploring a little bit in the time we have left is, in the book Paid to Think, and we've talked a lot about perspectives and how can you be more globally aware and putting things in perspective of there's 7.2 billion people in the world. So to think in terms of what's happening in my little family or my little community is a data point that may not be actually globally relevant. How do people kind of move between those things? I mean, obviously, within my little community is where I can have a direct impact. I can do something here and I can make an impact on that community. I can't necessarily make an impact to 7.5 billion people unless I'm in a different position than I am right now. But how can we develop our thinking, or how can we move our thinking up and down in the trenches where we are right now, but then up into what's the bigger picture look like and what implications does that have? And clearly that's the sort of thinking we need to develop to start to think about, well, what can we do to create that better future?
Let me start with a question. How many people, and this is not going to be anything I research, how many people listen to your podcasts?
It's probably between 1,000 to 1,500 for each episode in the...
Okay. Have you gotten feedback from different countries around the world from your podcast?
Yeah.
All different ages?
Yeah, I'd say so.
All different types of roles and responsibility?
Yes.
Could you possibly have impacted 150 million people? Because their decisions impact other people? So there's a saying, and I don't know, I'm not a saying guy, so I don't remember it, so please don't hit me over the head with this, but there's a saying, give me a lever long enough and I can lift the world. You're using the lever of a podcast to get a message out to individuals, whatever that topic may be, to influence their ability to perform, to improve their performance, to improve their lives. I've got to believe that is some part of your genre, some part of your theme, some part of your underlying core to make this happen. Besides making money and besides being visible, you are trying to help individuals. So with what I just shared with you, does 7.5 billion seem as difficult?
No, it doesn't seem as difficult. It's
okay.
I mean, it's the case of, as the message gets spread out, it's a network, connects with lots more people each time.
So one individual listens to your podcast, and you had a sample that you put on your page that said the virtual dinner. I don't remember the guy's name. He put on virtual dinners, and your audience could have listened to that podcast and put on a virtual dinner and maybe created a new community forum or a new community way of living or a new product that reached out and did something that gave somebody the ability to potentially feed their family. You don't know. So my point is, the challenge to answer your question, I think I'm partially answering it, is that you have a lot more influence and you're not just local. Actually, let me give one point to that. I was asked to speak at the Radio Broadcasting Association. I forget that was the name of it. And one of the challenges to the radio industry was they were becoming they thought that their space for radio became very local. And they were still having trouble getting people to listen to their radio because they were really trying to focus on the local. And on stage, I said, I understand you're trying to be local, to meet local needs. But to an 18-year-old, or a 20-year-old, this was probably 10 years ago, what is local? And someone said, oh, the whole world. I said, so you're mistargeting. You were trying to be local, so you got the 80-year-old who was sitting in their place wanting to know how the grass was growing, but the 18-year-old wanted to know what was happening in, you're in Melbourne, which I've been to, and I've worked there. So you were in Melbourne or in Sydney or in Cairns or in, so that's local because I can talk to my friends. And it changes the perspective. So I think, so I was answering the first question, which you didn't ask, but you made a statement. Yep. Sorry. I hope that's okay. The second question is, how do you think on a larger scale? Paid to think is not about global awareness. Paid to think is, it took 12 years to write, 14 complete revisions, 52 countries mentioned in the book. It is truly a global book. And its approach was not to be that. It was, I started writing for me because I was tired of reading from the experts. All you had to do was tip. Well, if tipping was that easy, why don't we just hand it out to everybody and everybody could read the book and tip? Good to great. Well, if being great just means reading the book good to great, where are the answers? I couldn't find them. And I got frustrated. I'd spent all this time reading these books and I had no tools when I was done. So I decided to write for me what I thought was valuable. And that grew and that grew and that grew to a point where I was able to do a few things. I had done about 1,800 interviews by the time the book was written, but I interviewed people privately for the work I was doing, working with companies to understand them. And these were global entities. They were not a global company, meaning they were companies from all over the world. And I started to notice that we actually, or I believed, and I still believe, that we don't teach leadership management in the right framework. That to some degree, there are 12 activities that every leader is involved in profit, nonprofit, government, military, and education. No matter what you're in, they do the exact same 12 activities every single day, but they vary by how much. And we don't teach these activities in the way in which we should. So here's a quick test for you. You own your own business. You tell me if any of these you don't do. Do you plan? Could be short or long term. Do you plan?
Yes.
Do you create new products and services? Yes. Do you create alliances?
Yes.
Do you leverage technology? Do you learn?
Yes.
Are you involved in understanding competition?
Yes.
Are you involved in being globally aware? Are you involved in the act of going out and leading, not just thinking about it, but acting, going out and leading? How about empowering people?
Yes.
What about innovating?
Definitely.
What about selling continuously?
Yes.
And what about forecasting?
Yes.
Okay, I could do that for every single leader on this planet, no matter what they do, no matter where they are, no matter what they're engaged in. Not just leader, any decision maker. We don't teach those activities. What we do is we build up the school, or call it a management or leadership school, and we tell them that they're going to learn and then go into a training program. But then we have a music school, and someone who's supposed to get out of the music school is supposed to be able to play music. An engineer is supposed to be able to do engineering. A chemist is supposed to do chemistry. A broadcaster is supposed to be able to do broadcasting. But a leader has to go to a training program. And what we do is we teach specifics, economics. We teach the specifics of supply chain. But in reality, the act of leading are those 12 activities. How we apply supply chain, how we apply our disciplines, no different than when you go into the military. You learn basic training, then you learn to shoot a rifle, drive a tank, and do other activities. And as a matter of fact, a general doesn't have to know how to drive a tank to be able to use one. And so what I did is I created for me an approach that said, what if we looked at this in a counterintuitive way? I mean, off the wall different. What if we taught people these 12 activities? Then they can work in a not-for-profit, take those same skills, go work in a profit. They could work in Thailand, they could work in Saudi Arabia, they could work in the Congo, they could work in Argentina. And all they would have to learn is the discipline of what they're specifically working in and doing. And that approach became a toolkit, a completely counterintuitive way of helping people to be able to realize higher performance all the time. And I talked about Jay Abraham. I was very cautious with the book. It did take 12 years. Nothing went in the book that didn't work in the real world first. But I remember sending the first chapter, the first time I ever sent the book to anybody was to Jay Abraham. Jay and I became friends, and I sent him the book. And I didn't hear anything from him. And I then show up in California to see him. And he was not there yet. And I said to the assistant, his assistant, I said, did he really read the book? So I don't have the confidence. I still don't know why people read the book. And she said, no, he read the book. And I said, really? She said, he gets a lot of books and he tosses them. He still reads a few pages and then he's done. She said he printed it out 6 times. Now the book is 700 and, well, have you written a book yet? I don't know if you've written a book, Jürgen. A typical book is 30 to 50,000 words. A big book is 100. This is 297,000 words. So it's the equivalent of 6 books or 5 books, depending on how you do the math. And so when we sat down, Jay said, I've written over 60,000 pages on just alliances, and your alliance chapter made me think. It was because it didn't come from the skill of learning alliances. It came from the skill of understanding alliances, and that there are 6 forms: ad hoc, consortium, project joint venture, merger, acquisition. Those are the 6 types. We don't create partners because there are 6 different types. So are you creating a project joint venture or a joint venture? Are you creating an ad hoc committee or a consortium? Are you doing a merger or an acquisition? Because they're different. And what are the pillars of developing them? And these are tools that I decided, for me, that the more I understood about them, the stronger I could become at what I do. And then I taught at NYU for 12 years, and I used it. Still in touch with so many of the students that we had. And I could say that I'm proud of it. It was very challenging to write because of all sorts of different, people don't want a 297,000 word book to be published. It's just costly to print. But it ended up being, we're still printing it, and it's still selling, and the CEOs of some of the largest companies in the world have read it, and we've won awards for it. So I don't know if that answered your question, but it's a different take on the paid the thing.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly a lot in the book, and I'm still working my way through some of the chapters, and I've gone through some, and then it certainly.
Oh, you've been reading it?
I am reading it. It certainly does make you think. So I'd have to agree with that sentiment. I've gone back to chapters and thought, I've got to. So I'm reading and listening to the audiobook. So I sort of often listen back. I think I've got to listen back to that chapter again and kind of because I get some ideas and then I get challenged. Am I doing that well or am I doing that badly? So, yeah. So.
First, thank you. Thank you very much. I never expected that for you to say that. And I do know people who have read, who get the audiobook. It's 32 hours long, the audio. And the guy said he's never touched anything like this. But what you're doing, saying you have to go back, the book is like an onion. You read it and you're ready for the level where you are. And when we were writing the book, my wife would say, well, she helped me after 9 years. I had challenges getting the writing done right. And she writes it brilliant. She's amazing. She would say, we need to put the story here. And I'd say, no, the story doesn't go there. No, here it goes there. No. And 6 months later, I'd say, here's where the story goes. She's, how did you know? How did you know it goes there? It's that when you get to the book, at the end of the book, you'll be surprised at the very end because you more or less became a beginner by getting to the end of the book because you will now see, like the Matrix, what you hadn't seen before. So how is your... it's making you think. I didn't know you were reading it. So the 12 actually worked the way I did it. What is the one thing that you feel comes out of it or changed you, or you are wrestling with, or what's something that you feel is valuable that you're still reading it?
Well, I think one of the things that it's done for me so far is broken down the idea of, I always thought I can't predict the future. And I've always wondered that people that recognize trends really early, and whether they invest in the right things or whether they develop a product that, before its time, but that it's ready when its time has come. And so it's the first one to market and takes off. I've always thought, I'm no good at that. And it's certainly challenged that perspective, because it's taught me that there are some things that I should be paying more attention to that I'm probably overlooking or probably not listening to or watching, that will give me a different perspective on what might be coming in the future, or where things may be. I mean, there's never any guarantee, but just...
No, there are guarantees to a large degree. That's one of the challenges is right now, unless I can predict a year from now, I can predict, and I'll be probably in the areas that I choose, I'll be nearly 100% correct. I can predict that a year from now I'll be a year older. I can predict you'll be a year older. I can predict that a year from now it'll be fall. I can predict a year from now at this time it'll be dark using the same scheduling. I predict right now the weather. I can predict a lot of things, biological, animal nature. So why don't we just predict the things that we can predict? And in the book, did you read the chapter? Did you skip to the forecasting chapter?
I have skipped to it, but I haven't really read that one in detail, though.
Oh, there's some things in there. There's some really cool tools in there, and you're going to challenge yourself to say, there are 3 different types of people in the world, broad brush. That means there are people who are retro. They live some in the future, some in the current, but a lot of time in the past. What's the data? What has it been? They talk about yesterday, what they've been up to. That's fairly easy to be. When you go to a dinner with your family, you tend to talk about today and what have you been up to. That's what a family dinner is about. The holiday dinner is, what have you been up to? So a whole conversation tends to be past. Then there's the current-oriented person. That person spends some time in the future and some time in the past, kind of middle of the road, and some in the present. We have to be careful of this person because their perspective is different. If I said to you, I'm going to build a nuclear reactor and in 2 years from now, I'm going to put on the stack, is that current or future? Remember, I'm putting a nuclear reactor, so I'm in the energy business. Is 2 years future for the energy industry?
No, probably not.
No. 30 years is. 50 years is. So that's still current. And a future-oriented person spends time in the future. They ask different questions. They're looking at and talking about what they can do, what they're building, what they're working on, what they see. And very few people have conversations future. It's very difficult. It's like climbing a sand dune. The minute you stop, you fall back. To be current, you can remember yesterday all day long for the next 50 years. But to know what's going to happen tomorrow takes a lot of work. So the equivalent is you really want to be a forward-oriented person. And the analogy that I use is if you're driving at night and you turn on your high beams, the brighter lights, why do you turn them on?
See further ahead. Yeah.
Why do you? No. See, okay. That's what you don't turn. That's the act. You turn on the high beams to anticipate better. The seeing further ahead is the data collection. So this way you don't slam on the brakes. You can take a turn better, but it also, your high beams go wide and they allow you to see the things that come from the side. So the same type of scenario is happening here, is if you can adjust your beams to not see a month in advance or 2, but actually spend some time 3 or 4 years into the 5 or 10 years into the future, you start to be able to react smoother. And to give you our Project Moon Hut Foundation is to establish a box with a roof and a door on the moon, a moon hut. And its purpose is because I believe the way we're addressing, counterintuitive, the way we're addressing space industry is not functioning as well as we might think. And we have 6 mega challenges on this planet: climate change, mass extinction, resource depletion, social displacement, political unrest, and exponential imbalance. And not the 17 SDGs, I don't know if you've heard them, they're very difficult to remember. I cannot remember them all, and nobody I've ever asked has been able to cite them all. We have 16 major things coming our way that we have about 40 years to be able to solve in my forecasting. So Project Moon Hut Foundation's work is to solve the 6 mega challenges by using space and space technology and paradigm shifting to cause those changes on Earth. And so that comes out of forecasting and all of the 12 activities that are involved in Pay the Thing. So you can, to go back, you can impact the world. You're doing it every day. And you can forecast. You do it every day, but you could be stronger at it. And you can have an influence in places you'd never thought about if you consider the network effect. The people that you influence others, which influence others. So you have a voice. And you have a choice to make that voice heard or to hide.
Well, that's fabulous, David. And I think on that note, that's a nice, positive, inspirational note. And I'm looking at the time here. We've gone quite a time, but I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's a good point to move on to the Buzz, which is our innovation round, and it's designed to help our audience who are primarily innovators and leaders in their field with some tips from your experience. So there's 5 questions. Hopefully you'll give us some insightful answers that'll inspire the listener to go and do something awesome as a result today and have an influence in the world.
Okay. I feel like I'm on a quiz show.
It is a little bit
Go
like
ahead.
that. What's the number one thing you think anyone needs to do to be more innovative?
The number one thing is to cross the threshold very quickly. As a Buzz answer, we run into situations all the time where we can solve it or skip it. But when you take the second to say, how did that work? What does it mean? And you cross the threshold and say, I'm going to dig deeper. When you dig deeper, that's where innovation comes from. It comes from the ability to go further than just asking the questions with surface answers. And the amazing discoveries that come along with it are part of being an innovator. I can give others, but that's the quote first that came to mind.
Right. So it's more than
crossing the threshold.
It's like, instead of just saying that's interesting and move on, it's that's interesting. Why is that, or what's caused that, or how can we change that or use it?
Quick example. I'm living in Hong Kong. You can use the MTR, their train station. You go down and you have a pass that you could use. You go down and you realize you don't have your pass. You could decide I'm not going to go. That's skipping it. You could say, I'll buy another pass. People do this all the time, and then they go. And you could say, well, and they forget about it. Or they can take a taxi. But some people stop and say, I wonder how many people do this. And then they start to ask their friends, and they notice and they come up with an innovative idea to solve that because they started to dig. And you have to be willing to cross the threshold. What would it take to make that happen, to solve this challenge? And that's where innovation, that's where the tire hits the road, is when you're willing to cross the threshold.
So there's a question there that I like to ask often, and it's, I have this problem right now. And is this a problem that I would have often? And is this a problem other people would have? So that kind of goes a little bit along those lines, right?
Can I make a suggestion? When you use the word problem, it means tough, doesn't it? Like you have to figure it out.
Yeah, could do it.
But if you use the word challenge, how do you feel about the same thing? Like I have a challenge I have to solve, or I have a problem I have to solve. Which one sounds? They're both the same.
Yeah,
which would you rather work on? The challenge
is more inspiring.
So I always use the word challenge. Not opportunity. That becomes that's another category. So if you change it to challenge, even other people will say, well, how do we solve that? But if you say problem, it's work. So just a suggestion. It's wordsmithing, yet even mentally it creates a new structure for you to rethink what you're addressing.
Well, language is quite important in these things, and how you feel about the word. Certainly, I can tell the difference.
And it tells yourself. It tells yourself about it. We don't realize how much we talk to ourselves. Since I'm 12 years old, I don't use the word STRES space. You can figure out the word, because the minute you say it, your body feels it. Just say it out. Can you know the word I just spelled? Say the word. Yeah. How do you feel? Okay. I don't say it. I say I have a challenge. I have a situation. I've got an obstacle, but I find different words to avoid that one word. And I counted once in 1 hour, one person used that word 17 times. We as a society in the English language, there are other languages that use that same word, don't realize how often we tell ourselves that the world is a problem and it's STR. And I say, don't even use the words. Stop talking to yourself.
Yeah.
Makes a difference.
And also we kind of adopt it as part of our identity sometimes by using that language with I am rather than I'm feeling.
I don't use those words. People say, how are you doing during the pandemic? I say, look, there's a road outside about 20 meters from my home. The dog leaves with my wife because she's safe with the COVID. So the dog looks at me and says, I thought I was the dog. You never leave the house. And I have left my home 14 times since November 25th of last year. 4 days to London, 3 days to Dubai. I was going to go back to Hong Kong, but with everything going in February. So, but I don't feel, they say, how are you doing? Okay. I said, I'm not socially distancing. I'm physically distancing. I talk to my friends all day long. So it's a mindset. And I think that's be useful those words. So we have to be careful what we tell ourselves to be innovative, to solve challenges.
Wonderful discussion. All right. Now, what's the best thing you've done to develop new ideas?
Okay. You've heard the saying, think outside the box. I say, no, great innovators think inside the box. Now, that's counterintuitive. One day I was sitting and I asked myself, I've got patents, 7 patents. I've got in artificial intelligence, consumer products. I've got them in battery technology. I've started businesses. I've done all these things. Why don't you ever say, David, think outside the box? I was just talking to myself. And I said, because you never do. You think inside the box. And then I defined it for myself. What I do is I create an experience, have life's experiences. And the more experiences I have, the more situations I'm in, the more I learn from people like yourself, the more I'm out there. When something arises in my life and I have to solve it, I don't think outside, because you can't just create something new. I pull from my experiences. So I pull from my travel and work in Bangladesh, and I pull with working with Nandan Nalakani of Infosys, or I draw, paint, and sculpt. I do my own carpentry, plumbing, electrical work. I pull from the tree work that I've done, and I solve that challenge. But I can call a friend. So the best way for me, the one thing that I've done is I've collected and experienced the world, and I'm paying attention. I'm living it. I'm not taking photographs. That's not mine to show other people. I'm living the world. And in living it, I'm thinking inside the box. So I remember one day I was testing it with a friend of mine, Mort Grosser, who's got 4 Lear jets, 2 of them intercontinental. He knew Stephen Jobs. He knows the founders of Google. Good friend. We're in California. And I said that we were having dinner with a white tablecloth made of paper, and I said to him, I've got this thing that we think great innovators think inside the box, not out. And he looks at me and we talk. He says, I don't like it. And he gets up to go to the toilet, bathroom, I don't know what to call it in Australia. And he doesn't come back for 20 minutes because he knows everybody in Palo Alto. And he comes back and he looks at it, and his girlfriend's there, and he's about 70 years old, and points to the table and says, that's exactly what I do. And I said, what do you mean? He said, he speaks French, I speak Spanish, I learn a lot of languages. I mean, he collects experiences. So when the situation arises, he doesn't have to learn something new. He already has it. So I'm then in Hong Kong with Edge, who runs KPMG's innovation. And I said the same thing. Let me share something with you. And he said, that's exactly what I do. I never heard it that way. Great innovators collect experiences like Albert Einstein or Alexander Graham Bell did 1,000 things wrong to find the one thing right. Well, I just was on my roof fixing gutters. It's 8 meters, 9 meters up. And I had to do things that were very scary. But I had the skills, the tools, the means. I have a smaller drill. It's an impact wrench. It's tinier. I brought that up. I brought up all the tools that I needed. I did it in a way because I had experiences being on ladders. Same thing with innovation, or same thing with building, is that I try to create life's experiences. And those life's experiences end up serving me well. When someone says, hey, I ship this, that, and that. And I said, no, you don't. And they said, no, I do. And I say, it takes 32 days to get from Hong Kong to Rotterdam via Maersk, because I've worked with the CEO of Maersk. What do you mean? I said, I work with the CEO of Maersk. I know how long it takes to get from Rotterdam to whatever. Or they'll say something about Eastern Europe. And I say, have you ever worked, for example, in Macedonia? And they'll say, it's Macedonia, David. No. If you've worked in Macedonia, it's Macedonia, like it's Slovakia, if you're Slovakian, because I had a Slovakian run my office in Hong Kong. Those experiences add richness to your life. And then on top of it, they give the ability to be able to address a challenge in a way you had never thought of before.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And it's connecting the dots, isn't it, with all those different experiences?
You can't help it. You can't help it if you're living life and in the moment, if you share those experiences, if you dance. I love to dance. I can dance all night. If you've been to countries around the world, and I worked in Bangladesh. I thought I was going to Korea, but the guy was hiring me. He didn't tell me the job was going to be in Bangladesh. But I had the opportunity to work with some amazing people in Bangladesh, and the Korean group didn't speak English. The management, there was about, I don't know how many, 50 or 60, and they had 15,000 Bangladeshis. So I had to work in sign language for the Koreans and for the Bangladeshis. But that experience, oh my God, the things I learned being there, that adds richness and flavor. So that when I'm in an environment, I could say, you're from Trinidad, aren't you? And they'll say, thank you. You noticed. Well, you said some things. You sound like you're Trinidad. Everybody says that I'm from either Jamaica or from the United States. I'm from Trinidad. And I remember sitting in the plane for 2 hours or 3 hours with this woman because she said, no, to the person with her, you go sit in his seat. I want to talk with him, because I recognized her as a person, not just as a color or a position in life. So I think it adds a lot of value to being innovative and being a better human being.
Right. I love it. All right. Now, do you have a favorite resource you use most often? I mean, it sounds like you've probably got thousands.
It's not that I have a resource that I use most often. I learn best. I can read. I do read. I learn best when I meet somebody and I talk and I experience it. So, for example, in my carpentry or plumbing, electrical, I can watch someone do it once. I don't have a photographic memory. I'm far from that. But I can watch someone do it and understand how to do. So the first time I did roofing, I went up on a roof with a roofer, and then I saw him do it and I said, I can do that. Well, the same thing happens with a lot of other activities. So I like to be able to meet somebody in person. I like to talk to them. So that's my go-to if I really want in depth. Yet I can do the same as everybody. I can look at Google search. I can, how do I say this? I spend a lot of time thinking. Anybody who's hearing this who knows me is going to say David is not an introvert, but I'm an introvert. And I try to create plans, not just concepts. So if I say I'm going to do something, I literally will lay out a CPM or a chart or a plan, knowing that it will change. But that allows me to go through the steps that other people might have to take so I can be compassionate to the understanding of learning new skills. And I don't know, it's a tough answer because I don't have a lot that I go to, but I have a lot that I go to. And if you compared me to somebody else, they might have 10 times more, or they might have 10 times less and be more effective than I am. I just try to do the best I can.
Yeah, I love it. So connection with people is really important, and learning from people. And, you've kind of talked to us about the global thinking globally and having a perspective of what's going on for different people in different cultures and different locations and different environments, then that's certainly consistent with that.
So let me add to that. I think this is one that I should have brought up, and probably I haven't had my phone on vibrate or ring since the 1980s when I first got my $3,000 back then phone. I'm in the moment. I'm literally in the moment as much as I can be. I don't have announcements and screens. So I'm here with you. And when I'm with people, I try to be, I try to be with them as much as possible. So to give you an example, the Slovakian who ran our office in Hong Kong said to me, you have to meet someone in Poland. And we go out to lunch, and we're talking. And 3 hours later, we walk out the door. And she looks at me and she says, thank you. And I said, no, thank you. You took time out of your day. I mean, I know you've got to get to work. I really appreciate this. And this is an honor that you've given me this much time. And she said, no, thank you. And I said, something's wrong. She said, I don't remember the last time I went out to lunch or any dinner where someone didn't pull out their phone and check their phone while we were together. I cannot remember a time. And I said, my phone was in my jacket. I turned it off. She said, you didn't even have your phone on you? I said, no, I hung it up on the thing. It's because I'm there. And it's not putting on airs. It's not trying to be better than anybody. I relish in that moment. And some people say I don't see cues. I think I see some cues, not others. Some people are better at than I am. I was taking a tour with somebody one day, and we showed up, and the place was closed. It was a holiday, but she thought it would still be open, so we walked quite a distance. I like to do private tours when I'm in countries. Not expensive. They don't have to be, so anybody who's thinking about it. Oh, and to add to that, is that people try to take holidays 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time. I take holidays 1 to 2 days at a time. So if I fly into Moscow and I'm working for 3 days, I'll take a day before and a day after because I'm already there to do tours, but I do schedule them before I show. Otherwise, you'll stay in your room. People say you take holidays 1 day at a time. I said, why not? Company sends you all the way to Oslo, and you're going to work on Tuesday or Monday, show up on Saturday, pay for the extra day. And so what happened in this one environment, we got to this place and she felt so badly about it. And I looked at her and I said, well, let's take a picture together. And she started crying. And I said, did I say something wrong? She said, I've been a tour guide for 13 years, and you're the first person who wanted to take a picture with me here. People aren't, it's like not people. I'd say there are individuals out in the world, because I don't want to put people into categories in that way, is that if you're present and you're there, your life could just be filled with richness. And those are the innovation ideas that come too.
Yeah. And then having those connections then comes back to what you were talking about earlier with getting the ideas, because you've actually got that connection and people open up and talk to you and you're learning from them.
I just did an interview with someone that he said, you started opening up, so I started opening up. And I said things I've never said on a podcast before. I don't know if I want people to hear those things. And the interview before that, the guy said, thank you for helping me share a portion of my soul. The topic was about space. But the questions that I asked were about his connection and relationships and understanding the chemistry and biology and everything that went along with it. But if you're present, I think you can find, and I wish I was present more often. I do make my mistakes, plenty of them. But that's one way to really, to learn and then have be inspired. One thing you might take away is I have this AIMED, 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 I came up with not long ago. Aspirational, inspirational, motivational, educational, and directional. If you can fill your life with all of them, but a great leader, a great program, a great project, a great initiative is always aimed. It's aspirational, it's inspirational, it's motivational, it's educational, and it's directional. And great plans, that's what you want to achieve. And it comes from being present often.
That's wonderful. All right. Now, what do you think anyone can do to differentiate themselves?
This is in a world where someone calls themselves an influencer because they can dance on TikTok. So it's a scary question. One day I think in about 20 years, there'll be an algorithm that can search the web for how many times you've taken photographs of yourself. And it will come back 17,596 times in 10 years. And you ask me, does that have an influence on who you are if your major photograph is of you? To differentiate yourself, I don't know if I have a very universal answer for that. And I don't want to give an answer that's weak. Educate yourself, which is yes, you should be doing that anyway. And we all learn in different ways. As I said, I like to talk to somebody. I do read books, but I do like that. Okay. I would say that there are people who are brilliant at all sorts of things in this world. There are people who can play a musical instrument better than you can ever play. There are people out there who can draw or paint or sculpt better than you can ever paint or sculpt. There are people out there who can write better than you. If you really want to be great at it, find those people and explore what they see in you. I don't see myself. I see myself in the mirror and I see myself when I stick out my hand, but I can't get a good view of me. And other people, I try the old adage, I'm trying to surround myself with people who are better than me. Better is not or different than me. And today with Project Moonhut, I had a call with a guy out of Germany. We speak at least once a week. We have about 15 hours of meetings going on all the time. And I had this conversation with Andreas, and he got pissed at me for something I wrote. And he was upset at me, not because of what I wrote, but he thought I didn't understand something. And it came down to a language barrier. It was the wrong words, the wrong way. He took it a different way than I did, and we often have these exchanges. And then he would come back and he would say, but David, you need to do this. Very German. So I'm half German, so I can say that. My father was born in Germany. He'd say, David, you need to do. And I'd say, but that's not my skill. It's your skill. That's why you're here, to help me see what I don't know. And I wish I don't know. That's such a tough question. There's just so many things that I need to fix about myself. So should I lay down? So I think that's one of the ways, is to find out the challenge that we have, I think, today in 2000, which has been around for a long time too, 2000s, 2020, is that we listen to what people give us without trying to interpret it and understand it. It is one person's perspective of view from one culture, from one environment, from one situation. And I won't name names. There are people who lose Google eye to some writers and to some people. And you have to be very careful. You need to get a semblance, a quantity of reviews from people and thoughts and things, and explore. And I'll give you one story to show this. I'm at an event, the top 100 CIOs in the world, the largest companies in the world, for one of the largest businesses in BPO in the world, business process outsourcing. I think it was BPO, or I think that was it. And they had a guy get up and talk about a topic that he's an expert. He wrote a book on it. And he said something that I heard, and I said, wait. He said he's never been able to prove in the real world. Well, first, he was an academic. He writes about it. He's a brilliant writer. And we're in the lobby afterwards, and the CIO says of one company, well, we're going to do this. The guy said I should just make the choice, and I'm going to do this. And I said, wait. You have 25,000 people are relying on your decision, and you're just going to do it? I can give you 4 reasons why it won't work. So I stood on stage afterwards. I got in trouble, but they knew I was right. They came up afterwards, and I said, the people who hired this person brought them to give you a perspective. They didn't say that everything they said they'd agree to. They wanted you to be entertained. They wanted you to be educated. But it's your role while you sit in the audience to make calculations as to what works and what doesn't. Just because someone wrote a book doesn't mean they're great at what they do. I ran the New York State National Speakers Association and I said, I ran this organization for years, and I can tell you a lot of speakers can't do what they say on stage in real life. A lot of people who write books can't do what they write about. So you have to be more prudent, more diligent, more insightful, and take the information and if you can't answer it, have other people help you. I don't know if I did that right, but I hope I did.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, this is absolutely fascinating, David. I could go on for ages, but we've already gone well over time allocated. So where can people reach out, find out more about you, get a hold of your book, and maybe even reach out and say thanks for what you've shared with us so generously today?
We'll do a few things. If we go back and forth, I'll send you the first 3 chapters digitally. So that you can have that, and if you want to distribute it, people can start reading the book. I think just that alone is a lot, but there's a value, 2 or 3 chapters. I have something that I can make. So that's one. The other one is you can reach me at david@davidgoldsmith.com. Very easy way to get a hold of me. It is on LinkedIn. If you know the LinkedIn series, it's LinkedIn / and then your name. Mine is David Allen, Allen Goldsmith for LinkedIn. And then Twitter is at Goldsmith. Instagram is at Mr. David Goldsmith. Someone else made that for me, gave me that title. So I think those are a few ways to get a hold of me.
Great, thanks. And we'll have links to all of those.
Oh, and Paid to Think is on Amazon.
So we'll have links to all of those in the show notes, and people can click straight through. So finally, David, who else should I get on the podcast and why?
I knew this was coming because we had brought this up earlier, and there are a lot of people in the world who are amazing, and I tried to think of somebody who would come on the show because a lot of individuals are not as easy to get on a show, and I think this guy's he's an interesting and amazing guy. His name is Peter Williams. He is living in Hong Kong, and he has a way of connecting to people that's admirable. It's his way of changing the world, and I think he would be a good interview. I think he just has a different way, and I'm actually speaking for his group on Friday about how to change the world through Project Moon Hut. I'm speaking Friday night with Hong Kong to go over. So he's a great guy. I can connect you with him.
All right. Well, that would be wonderful. So we'll reach out to Peter and have him on the show, have that conversation as well. So thanks so much for sharing your time so generously today. I mean, we've gone well over the normally allocated time, but I think it's really valuable. There's lots of lessons and lots of challenges to conventional perspectives that we've talked about today. I've really enjoyed this. I'm sure the listener will get a lot out of this. I've learned a lot. So thanks for all you've shared, and all the best, and let's stay in touch.
My pleasure. This was it was great to connect with you here.
I certainly hope you enjoyed that fantastic, engaging and thought-provoking conversation with David. We certainly covered a range of topics. For me, there were 2 themes that came out of all the topics we discussed, and they were digging deeper with curiosity and taking a global perspective, which often changes our opinions on things that we've so far only experienced in our limited local environment. I'd love to know what you took away from David's episode. Leave a comment below the blog post, which can be found at innovabiz.co/David Goldsmith. That is DavidGoldsmith. SMITH. All lowercase, all one word, innovabiz.co/David Goldsmith. You'll also find contact information for getting in touch with David there, as well as links to the Goldsmith Organization's website, his book Paid to Think, his social media pages, and the other resources we spoke about in our conversation today. If you liked this episode, please do share it with 2 other people that it might help. Tag me in on that share and I'll reach out to you with a special surprise. David suggested that we have a conversation with the author of Productive Accidents, a playbook for personal and professional adventure, Peter Williams, on a future InnovaBuzz podcast episode. So Peter, keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation from us to the InnovaBuzz podcast courtesy of David Goldsmith. Tune in again to the next episodes of the InnovaBuzz podcast, where we've got yet more fantastic guests lined up, including Yaro Starak of Inbox Done and Blog Mastermind, and Steve Brown, author of The Golden Toilet. Thanks for listening to this episode. Make sure you subscribe to the show to be reminded of new episodes. It's free to subscribe. Leave a review if you like. Even if you don't like me, I'm okay with that. I'm asking you to leave a review because it helps other people find this show. Go to innovabiz.co to join our marketing transformation community and access a free gift my team and I made for you. It's the Marketing Master Mini Class. We want to give you everything you need to transform your marketing into a human-centered, relationship-focused growth engine. Until next time, I'm Jürgen Strauss from InnovaBiz. Remember, be awesome and keep innovating.